Very much, Get. So welcome to my colleagues, Stephen, Thulasizwe. Thank you for being part of this interesting session. Thank you for the attendees to be there and following this session, which will be discussing about looking into Africa's agri-food challenges, trends, statistics, and investment opportunities. I'll probably start with a quick presentation of myself, and then I'll give the floor to Dr. Thulasizwe and Stephen to do a quick presentation. So my name is Quentin Rukingama. I'm from Burundi. I'm one of the managing partners of JBQ Africa, which is an impactful agribusiness advisory firm which supports different institutions from the public sector, private sector, and civil society to build sustainable agribusiness value chain. So in a nutshell, JBQ Africa is an agribusiness value chain builder. So I will give the floor to Dr. Thulasizwe to have a brief presentation of himself, and then Stephen, and then we'll get into the juice of this discussion. Over to you, Dr. Thulasizwe.
Thank you very much, Quentin. And good afternoon to the audience and colleagues. My name is Thulasizwe Mkhabela, as Quentin has introduced me. I come from the Agricultural Research Council, ARC for short, here in South Africa. Our main mandate is to do agricultural research and development in order to help the agricultural sector in Southern Africa. I would say Southern Africa because our mandate goes just beyond the borders of South Africa, even though we are a South African institution, so that the agricultural sector can become more productive, efficient, and technical. So we cover the whole spectrum of the agricultural value chain, except for sugarcane. And the reason we don't do sugarcane is that sugarcane has got a well-established research institute of its own here in South Africa. I'll leave it there for now as a way of introduction because I know our time is limited.
Thank you very much, Dr. Thulasizwe. I'll give the floor to Stephen. Over to you for a presentation of yourself.
Right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Stephen Awuah. I'm a senior manager working with Farrelly and Michelle in Sub-Saharan Africa. Our office is based in Accra, Ghana, and we have operations across the globe. We are experts in the area of agribusiness, food and beverage, agri-food, mergers and acquisition, food security, sustainability, environmental sustainability and governance, agtech and food tech, and we work with government and multilateral agencies, rendering key support services in the area of due diligence, commercial and technical, project evaluation and management, feasibility and financial modeling, policy strategy development and execution, sustainability due diligence and auditing, as well as market intelligence and insights. Thank you. That's by way of introduction.
Thank you very much, Stephen. So probably what we'll do, we'll jump directly into the Q&A session. As we are pretty much short in terms of this session, I guess we have only 24 remaining minutes. If both of you, Stephen and Thulasizwe, do allow me. So I'll start with basically the statistics which have been shared into the introduction, probably adding some more statistics for our audience to be in a position to have the big picture perspective before we jump into now some of the questions. So as we know, Africa is often referred to as the future food basket of the world. It's sitting on 60% of worldwide unused arable lands. As we know, the current food market by the World Bank Group is estimated at 300 billion USD, versus in the next 10 years where we'll be able to reach 1 trillion USD. So, however, as being noticed by the UN CTAD, which is basically monitoring the trade, especially in the development world, from 2016 to 2018, the Africa import bill for food is estimated at 85% of the total food consumed on the continent. And it's basically reaching $35 billion, which is a tremendous figure. So the idea here is to see how we can translate those gaps into opportunities, especially when it comes to Africa food business opportunities. I'll start with this question to both of you, Thulasizwe and Stephen. Where do you see investment opportunities in your current space when it comes to the agribusiness market? Over to you, Stephen.
Right, thank you, Quentin. Looking into the sub-Saharan Africa, you could clearly see a lot of investment opportunities that are very rife. Because come to think of it, a continent that owns about 60% of the worldwide unused land, and unfortunately, the continent is unable to produce enough food to feed itself as well as to feed the world. So the key areas where I see investment opportunities in sub-Saharan Africa, the first is in the area of infrastructure. We need to develop very resilient infrastructure in terms of, making up very good roads, to transport commodities from the producing points into the markets, and also feed them into the key supply chains across the continent. The area of irrigation is another key area where we need to direct a lot of investment, so we could be able to produce enough food all year round for consumption and for the markets. The area of storage facility is another key area where I feel that a lot of investment needs to be pushed in there, because you agree with me that there's been significant food losses, for most of the commodities that are produced on the continent. And I feel that if we're going to be able to be self-sufficient in terms of food production, we need to take very good care in terms of the post-harvest handling of these commodities. So storage facilities is another area. The next that I can talk about, so that I'll allow my colleague to come in, is the area of value addition, food processing, which is critical and which is key. Africa cannot continue to export raw food, which you agree with me that doesn't come with a lot of, returns. But then if we're able to add value to the food, if we're able to process the food, it goes to triple or quadruple the initial cost of selling in the market if you should sell these at the raw food in the market. So these are the key areas that I see opportunities for investments within the sub-region.
Thank you very much, Stephen. I'll give the floor to Thulasizwe. Doctor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Quentin. I agree entirely with what maybe just to let you know on to the last point that you mentioned, is that Africa, not only do we export raw materials, but we export the very same thing that we exported, that we import the very same thing that we exported out of Africa, having had value addition somewhere else. So it means we're creating jobs, we're exporting jobs and the profits to other parts of the world, and we only just consume the final product at 4 times the price of what it would have been had it been produced locally. But I don't want to actually repeat what he said. I just want to add 2 of my own points on where I see investment in Africa. The first one, over and above what has been mentioned, is the input side of agriculture. We import a lot of our inputs, especially fertilizers and the agrochemicals that are used in commercial agriculture from elsewhere. And if we were to have investment going to that area so that Africa can also produce its own inputs in terms of seeds, in terms of fertilizers, in terms of all the other things that you need to actually run and operate a vibrant agricultural sector. So I think there's a huge scope for investment in the input side. And we have a lot of the raw materials that are used to produce these inputs. So Africa should look at that. And the second one is investment into agricultural research and development. We consume a lot of agricultural R&D that is produced somewhere else. And the danger with that is that when the scientists produced it in their own countries, it was not meant necessarily for us as Africa, let alone specific countries in Africa. So if we were to invest, or if there would be sufficient investment in agricultural R&D then agriculture would produce solutions to its own problems that we are facing, and then increase the efficiency and the productivity of agriculture. Because not only do we have the most arable land, but our yields are still far below optimal levels because of not sufficient agricultural R&D. Thank you. I'll leave it at that for now.
This is fantastic because as I'm assessing what both of you, Stephen and Thulasizwe, have mentioned, we are covering basically in terms of investment opportunities, the full value chain. If we start with Thulasizwe, we are talking about the input side, which can be localized in a way that we can have more fitting products and increase yield in Africa instead of using product coming from abroad and designed by other people for other region, which definitely might not have the impact we're looking for when it comes to the yield production. Then we move into the other chunk of the value chain. Stephen has mentioned storage facilities. So we're talking about how to fight against post-harvest losses. So we have aggregation opportunities, which is fantastic. And prior to that, he also mentioned irrigation, which is basically in the same area in terms of food production. And then we move now into a processing, which is value addition. And the question now remains in terms of how can we move those foods all along the value. Talked about from a logistic perspective, bottlenecks when it comes to infrastructure and the rest. So this is very interesting picture you've depicted, both of you, showing to the attendees to this session that there are investment opportunities all throughout the value chain. So my next question to both of you is how the Africa Intertrade can play a role in facilitating investment, especially in sub-Saharan Africa when it comes to the agri-food. Over to you, Thulasizwe. Thulasizwe?
Apologies, I was talking to myself.
No worries.
It's a disease we all have.
For sure.
Yes, I was saying it's an interesting question that you're raising about the African free trade, which our leaders recently signed and ratified. But for me, for that to actually reap the intended benefits, is that we need to look at harmonizing our policies as Africa in terms of agriculture to make sure that we are all starting on almost equal footing. Because as it is now, if we don't look at harmonizing and making sure that there is development of those African countries that are still lagging behind others, is that we are running the risk of having a few more developed economies on the African continent actually dominating and reaping the benefit, most of the benefits from the free trade. But in a nutshell, the African free trade is a brilliant idea that we just need to work hard in hammering the mechanics of how do we make sure that this is to the benefit of everybody. But definitely it should see Africa trading more with itself, because as African countries, we are quick to trade with Europe, with North America, with Asia, but we don't do sufficient trade, intra-African trade, as it were. Even neighboring countries don't trade as much as they should. Thank you.
Many thanks, Thulasizwe. So my takeaway is that to make sure that those investments do benefit for the Africa Free Trade Agreement, which has been signed, there is a good level of harmonization requested at country level to make sure you facilitate goods moving from one country to another. And you're right, we've been seeing export bans from an East Africa and Southern Africa perspective, for instance. We've seen export bans from moving goods from Tanzania to Kenya, for instance. And that has been affecting basically the food market. We've seen also other bans, notably in Zambia, in terms of export flows of maize, especially during drought periods, so which has been affecting now the rest of the countries. So those are the things which we truly believe, as you mentioned, Thulasizwe, might help in terms of allowing the investors to feel confident to have access to different markets, not only within a country, but in the sub-region at least, and also facilitated by the point Stephen has raised in terms of investment into infrastructure. Over to you, Stephen. In terms of Africa Intertrade, how can we leverage on that in terms of investment opportunities in the agri space? Over to you, Stephen.
All right, thank you, Quentin. I think that the AFTA have come to stay. The African Free Trade Agreement has come to stay, and we need to take advantage of it to kind of improve cross-border trade, between our countries in Africa. What I can say here is the fact that we need to be a bit strategic. Countries in Africa need to be a bit strategic in terms of looking at the potentials they have within their countries and what commodities they have relative advantage of producing on a scale. So, for instance, if Ghana is producing, let's say, maize on a scale, we produce enough, to be able to export, to do, trading that commodity with other countries within the sub-region, let's say Nigeria or Benin and others. And then the other countries, looking at the relative competitive advantage they have in producing other commodities, they kind of also show up their game. And then so they could produce to kind of supply into the other countries who may not be able to produce that particular commodity in a significant volume. I think that this is something we need as a continent to begin to have a conversation around. So we wouldn't have kind of create that kind of duplication. Every country is producing, let's say, maize, and at the end of the day, there is abundance, and the distribution becomes a challenge, and post-harvest losses comes in, and a lot of food is wasted. I feel that that is an area we need to look at. And then another thing that I will mention to boost, regional trade, within, trade within the continent, is the fact that when countries need to improve the cross-border relationships, with each other, because sometimes there are challenges with movement of goods, from one country to the other. Sometimes the duration of movement of, vehicles, across border and all that. Sometimes there are delays, there are challenges at the border points of entry, and these all contribute to food waste and, post-harvest losses. And I feel that these are areas we need to look at if we're going to strengthen and improve, regional trade within the continent.
That's very interesting, the point you've mentioned, and actually I think you've even anticipated some of my questions down the line in terms of bottlenecks, and I can see border challenges being one of them. So that's great. So we have one question from the audience related to the topic we are currently discussing. It's from Bruce Hillier. He's asking, in conjunction with the fair trade policies, which Thulasizwe has mentioned, would it be important to have an umbrella organization covering each country, and which can probably provide, from an Africa perspective, an understanding of what is the level of production, supply, demand, and export of those soft commodities? Over to you, Stephen.
Right. Having an umbrella body, to coordinate the food production and supply as well as demand within the continent, I feel it's a good idea because we need to have one regulatory body, one coordinating body that is able to kind of pick information from across various countries, look at what commodities they produce in. What are their potentials? What are the volumes they can produce, to be able to feed themselves and export the rest? And then that body will be able to coordinate the demand across several other countries where a particular commodity is needed. So I feel that there should be that kind of framework of demand and supply, mechanisms for movement of food from one country to the other. So therefore, creating an umbrella body, putting an umbrella organization, in charge of these arrangements would facilitate, movement of food and then demand to meet specific demands within the the continent. Yeah, that is my contribution.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Thulasizwe, I think we have a question for you here. It comes from Desiderio Fernandez. I hope I pronounced his name properly. He's mentioning that one of the biggest challenges for Africa Intertrade is the cost of logistics. And he's wondering what currently it is done by different countries in Africa when it comes to lobby to prioritize such kind of investment in infrastructure when it comes to road, rail, and other typical infrastructure to move goods from one port to another. Over to you, Thulasizwe.
No, thank you very much. That's a very good observation and a good question. The problem is that countries have been doing it in their own segmented way in terms of making sure that the logistics. But going back to the point where we started, where we talked about harmonization across African countries, is that we need to then, in conjunction with what was suggested by Bruce, or Bruce's question is that when we look at monitoring the levels of production and what is being produced, we also need to look at how is that going to be moved from the point of production to the last mile in terms of the market. And that would need, it's an issue of logistics. However, it's very difficult to actually dictate how African countries should do this, because we must be mindful that African economies and countries are battling with a lot of other challenges. From where I sit, we have an issue of unemployment, issues of poverty, issues of inequality. So for the government and the powers that be, it's difficult to actually get the priorities right in terms of saying, this is what we need to do. But I think it's beginning to dawn upon African leaders that logistics and infrastructure is the way out of poverty for most of us, because the role for government is to create an enabling infrastructure or an enabling environment. Infrastructure and provision of logistics is one of that enabling environment, so that entrepreneurs can then step in and start producing and doing what they do best. The problem is that you find that one country may have well-developed logistics and infrastructure, but moving across borders to the next country becomes an issue. I know there are countries in Africa where the same train that moves from one country cannot go to the other country because the railway trains are not the same size. You must get to the border, offload into another tractor, into another train from the other country, and that creates a lot of bottlenecks, and it's time-consuming and expensive to the entrepreneurs to actually move goods from one country to the other. I know I dodged the question a bit, but I can't give a direct answer. Thank you.
So thank you, Thulasizwe. I guess it gives a little bit more meat on the bone in terms of what is being done and in terms of challenges. So my final question is related to that point, challenges. What kind of challenges have you been seeing which have been hindering investment into the agri-business or agri-food space? One of them, which has been mentioned, is the bottlenecks when it comes to infrastructure. The other one has been mentioned related to Africa Intertrade and the challenges to get food moving from one country to another, which basically is limiting the business opportunities for the different investors. And that's because of the heaviness of the administration and processes somebody has to go through the border posts. And the other one is mismatching infrastructure, as Thulasizwe has been mentioning. Over to you, Stephen. Any additional constraint you've been seeing which are hindering the agribusiness space investment?
Right. Thank you, Quentin, for the question. The additional area that I see as a key challenge is at the policy level, where we have key challenges with land tenure system across countries in Africa. There are challenges of trying to aggregate lands, in a mass to be able to, move from subsistence agriculture, primary production to commercial production. And I feel that Africa has gotten to the point where we need to move away from primary subsistence farming, to commercial large-scale agriculture. That is the only way we can be able to feed ourselves and be able to feed the world. So at the policy level, I would encourage African leaders, to take the bull by the horn and try as much as possible to kind of look at the land tenure situations in their various countries, find ways and means to bring on board the custodians of the land and the various stakeholders, and find innovative ways to help build land masses, for agricultural production. And there is an area, if we are able to succeed as a continent, it is likely to invite a lot of investors into the continent, and agriculture, the face of agriculture is going to be transformed massively. And we wouldn't see what we're seeing now. We will get to the point quickly where we would be able to produce enough food, to feed ourselves and also export. That is one area. Another area that I can talk about is the area of provision of subsidies, agricultural subsidies. You will agree with me that a good number of our farmers may have that intention and interest, to go into large-scale production. But then when it comes to procurement of the inputs, there's always a challenge, in terms of assets, in terms of cost, or how to aggregate, investments to be able to procure the needed inputs. So governments in Africa need to put provision of subsidies into agriculture, at the they need to bring it to the front burner of their discussions, so that a good number of farmers who are eager, to boost production, to increase the scale of primary production, could be supported. And even looking along the value chain, all aspects along the value chain, all the activities, all the things that it needs to be done to ensure that we're able to move food from the farm to the fork quickly, could be done with some subsidy provision by African government. And the last that I want to talk about is the fact that interest
probably
rate
very short, because
okay.
we a one-liner.
All right. High interest rate is also a challenge. So we need to work to bring interest rate on loans to agribusinesses very low. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask each of you what could be the takeaway to facilitate the investment within the agribusiness space. And by doing so, I'm just asking you 3 words. 3 words. So Thulasizwe, what will be your 3 words and takeaway for the attendees?
Ease of doing business would be my three words. The governments, African governments, need to look at making doing business in Africa easier for investors. Thank you.
That is fantastic. Ease of doing business. Stephen?
Mine is leaders must be proactive. African leaders must be proactive. What I mean is that policies and mechanisms that they need to put in place to make ease of doing business in Africa easier, to invite more investors into the agribusiness space, should be encouraged.
Fantastic. We heard about proactivity and ease of doing business. These are fantastic takeaways from this session. I truly thank Dr. Thulasizwe and Stephen to have been part of this, and hope that the attendees were able to pick some ideas if they want to invest in agribusiness. Thank you very much, and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you.